Ambassador, if I start with you, I actually wanted to ask a little bit about the ending of the talks in North Korea and to what extent that was a show of strength from the president or not, and if these are all linked with the talks with China.
We don't know what the Chinese have done with respect to the North Korean talks. I don't think anyone's applauding the fact that they didn't make progress. We can say they met. They didn't leave in a huff, and they committed to continue to work. So let's hope that that happens. It's something that we need to get done.
Ambassador, on the topic of the China talks, clearly there's been a lot of positive commentary, whether from Secretary Mnuchin or Larry Kudlow on our air this morning or others in the last couple of weeks, that the two sides are getting closer. But from your experience of leading these sorts of negotiations, how hard is getting over that line, the final leg of the negotiations, if you will?
It's always difficult to wind up an agreement. What I hear is that they have 6 memoranda of understanding, that they are focusing on critical issues, and we all wish that they have great success.
Stephen, what's your take on the progress we've seen of late with the China talks? Do you think both sides are ready to make a deal now?
Well, Wilfred, we've heard a lot of, I think, political spin on your network this morning, extolling the virtues of the greatest deal in history. But these structural issues, as Ambassador Hills just alluded to, are very, very difficult to reach agreement on. So how are we actually dealing with intellectual property? How are we actually dealing with forced technology transfer? And why do we have an MOU on the currency? The currency is not an issue. They brought it in to this discussion for reasons that are not clear. The Chinese currency on a broad multilateral basis is up 50% since the end of 2004. So it's not being manipulated at all. If anything, it's creating problems for China. So there's a lot of questions that remain to be resolved here, and hopefully we'll get to the finish line in a constructive way.
Stephen, do those issues that you described there represent impediments to the Chinese side actually coming any nearer? In other words, the big question has been not whether at this point there's a proposed agreement from the United States on the table, but whether those structural issues can win any commitments from the Chinese side.
Look, I think that the Chinese and the U.S. side both want to reach agreement, but you have to sort of step back and look at what those issues mean for China's overall growth and development strategy. And you know, if you're looking for China to sign an agreement that changes its economic model, it forces China to abandon its push for indigenous innovation and the growth aspirations they have between now and 2050, I think you're going to be disappointed. China is very committed to its strategic efforts to keep pushing ahead in its economy, the transitions that it's making, and recognizes that certainly it needs to make some concessions to temper the pushback from the United States. But the core premise of China's strategy, I think, will survive this and most other efforts to unwind it from China's trading partners.
Ambassador Hills, one of the key points of all of this is going to be enforcement and what that mechanism looks like. We're starting to get some more reports in the last 24 hours about how that could potentially take shape. This idea of the U.S. bringing complaints to China and then working through it with them, talking to them about it. Sort of this idea that tariffs could be a key piece of leverage that could be re-implemented depending on how China reacts. Is that the right tack here?
Well, in my view, the right path would be to join with our allies and to go with representing 85% of the global economy and urging and finding ways to encourage China to change. But I would say that today the USTRs talked about having a trio of enforcement measures from the working level to the deputy level to the cabinet level. And I do absolutely agree that frequent meetings talking about the differences is very, very helpful. I don't think that you can let things simmer for a year and not have a meeting to talk about the substantive issues.
Stephen, what's your take on the strength of China's economy at the moment? Clearly, some signs are slowing. Felt like it was perhaps stabilizing, but the PMI data this morning, the lowest for 3 years.
Well, Wilfred, I think there's no question that the Chinese economy has slowed a lot. But I think the strength is more short-term, and they've done a lot of policy stimulus over the past year with cutting their reserve ratios 5 times. The credit numbers are picking up. And actually, if you look at that PMI report that came out this morning, the new orders component was up for the first time in several months. The headline production-based number was down. So you got to be careful in just, looking at these figures on a superficial basis. I do think the Chinese economy will stabilize and begin to improve by the middle of this year. And conversely, I think the U.S. economy is coming off its sugar high, and you can raise some real questions about U.S. growth in 2019. And I think the long-term fundamentals of the two economies are very different. China's got much more of a reservoir of saving than a saving shore U.S. does, and that'll serve China, I think, fundamentally quite well for years to come. And we're going the other way with our big budget deficits.
Professor Roach, I just have to dig into that comment you made a little bit more. What data or what signs, signals are out there that you see as contributing to this viewpoint that the U.S. economy is going to slow further?
Well, housing market's weak, jobless claims are up. I think the GDP, while it came in, slightly stronger than expected in the fourth quarter of 2018, will be little changed in the first quarter of this year. The fiscal impetus that really supported growth is now going the other way. So, I think there's some question marks. There's no question that we had a lot of momentum last year, but that's ancient history. We've got to look at what the fuel in the tank is like over the course of this year, and I think there's some legitimate questions that can now be raised.
Okay. And quickly, Ambassador Hills, just to pivot back to China before we finish this up, say we do get some sort of deal. What are the next steps here in the U.S.? Is this something that is going to be in front of lawmakers, in front of Congress, the way we see USMCA, or is this something that the executive branch can just move forward with unilaterally?
It depends on how we move forward. If we move forward on the memorandum of understanding where China is making some changes, the executive branch can carry those out. If we're trying to have differences made in the tariff schedules, then we need congressional approval. But, let me say that I think we're at a very good moment in trying to work with China. Steve has said that it's stronger than it appears, but there are a lot of reformers in China who believe that the funneling of credit to state-owned enterprises that are losing money is actually not a good policy, and that the changes that we are urging are in China's best interest. That is, there is an opportunity for win-win outcomes.